This is the Entrepreneurship Speaker Series. We're grateful to Hillcrest Bank for sponsoring this. And before hearing from our speaker, Kristen, we have a special guest here with us today, Rich Christensen, who is the founder of the Entrepreneurship Program here, and he will be introducing our speaker.
Heard Kristen was speaking, I couldn't help but come down and do a personal introduction. I'm very tender for Kristen, and you're in for a real treat today. Her background is nothing short of remarkable. She was assigned by President Bush a major cabinet role here in the United States. She's been a finance budget executive director for multiple governors here in the state of Utah, ran the Department of Workforce Services. But on a personal level, this is where I really deeply connect to Kristen. About a year and a half ago, I was introduced and we instantly connected. I'm very honored to be her mentor at this phase and to help her model her business. And the remarkable way which she implements with a heart-led focus is really touching. At the age of 11 years old or so, Kristen was diagnosed with the eye degeneration disease, and bit by bit began to reduce and then actually eventually lose her sight. And despite that, and with that added, I think gifts were given, and the remarkable ability without sight, though, to see, to really, truly, clearly see. She presently runs Epiphany, which consults governors around the country, and I think right now primarily working in Nebraska at seeing marked dramatic improvements in efficiency. Kristen is totally a heart-led leader, a remarkable individual, and someone that I am very, very proud to not only count remarkable, but also a dear friend. So I just really hope we give her attention, and this is when you want to pay attention to, guys. So thank you for having Kristen.
That is so sweet. That meant a lot. I mean, Rich started this program, right? So people who just give back because they want to and to make a difference, that's what really matters in the world. Even in my point of my life, I still need mentors. And Rich is that to me. And sometimes we kind of go through life thinking we can figure it out on our own or got it all handled. And I just don't think we can do it all alone. So it's really actually humbling that he is my mentor. So thank you to Rich for having this place where students can come and think about it. I'm going to talk a little bit today about mindset with a few tactics, but I'll spend more time on the mindset of entrepreneurship or business or organizations. I have in government at least, I'm probably 180 degrees different for how government usually works. I have some very strong opinions about it. But I'll start with a lot of what I'm going to talk about today has been influence. I've been a budget director. I've managed 24,000 people, $24 billion budget, large things, right? And that's all great, yada, yada. But the thing that's probably influenced me the most, and you'll hear it in my presentation today, is when I was going blind, there were a few years I was in the transition. I was functionally illiterate. I couldn't read Braille. I couldn't see print anymore, trying to do college. And I was on Social Security disability income, living off like $300 a month. It was case managed. You'll hear a lot of that in social service circles. They call them individualized plan. Government loves to plan. They do plans all the time. Plan. So they had me on all these plans, and it was a nightmare. I'm grateful. I'm really grateful to be in a country where there are safety net programs, don't get me wrong. But I also experienced the other side of those organizations, and it's influenced me both in my business today, how I do work, and I think it's highly relevant to all of you, wherever you land in your businesses or your life, organizations, whatever you do. So let me just start with this idea of ineffective innovation. We love to talk about innovation. In fact, in government, I call it the dictionary of dysfunction. It's all these words they love to use that mean nothing. Innovation, transformation, integration, alignment. It's nutso. But they kind of get obsessed, and organizations can get obsessed about these innovation cultures. And I want to give you 2 examples, and I'll walk you through it today. The first example is back in the day, 1800s, blind people were literally, there was no way to read. Braille didn't exist. Nothing. You're literally trained to be a professional beggar or to work in a circus. Those were your options. And there was a really great guy. He was a nobleman. Set up the first school for the blind over in France. and wanted to teach kids how to read. And they came up with this great idea. They took the alphabet that all of you sighted folks use and started making twigs out of it. They would make letters out of twigs. So a blind person could fill a letter A or fill a letter B. And then they started to emboss the letters. So you could take a piece of paper and basically emboss it and make a raised A. And it was great. They really wanted to do well with this. But the problem was, as a blind person, you can't just carry around a suitcase of sticks and throw them on the ground and read. Or you can't just carry some of these books they would make were 60 volumes in one room. Like a kid's book, the first one they embossed was literally the whole wall of a library because it took up so much space. So they were trying to innovate, but what did they miss? Let me give you one example, another example in the business world. Tata, it's a big, huge company over in India. They build many things, but one line of theirs is cars. And they came up with this great idea to make the most affordable car in the world. And they called it the Tata Nano, and it was inflation adjusted, about $22,000, $2,400. So a super cheap car. They did new engineering, how they did the chassis, all the stuff they changed to make a very safe but very affordable car. And it was kind of exciting at the beginning, and then it died off. But it was innovative. They literally could design a car for $2,000, brand new. Who can do that, right? They did different design with how they did space frame design. I'm not an engineer, Rich is, but it's fascinating the new innovations they brought to the table. On both cases, we've got innovation happening, right? New engineering innovation. We also have innovation in the world of blindness, of using embossed things to finally, in the first time, teach somebody to read. But they both failed. And I see this happening all the time, at least in the organizations I work with, because innovation by itself means nothing. Innovation should happen to solve a problem. And the question is, whose problem are we solving? For me, I always insist that we start with who is the customer we are solving for. Getting away from vague ideas and transformational languages, or even a business concept. Who is the person? Who's the person going to use the product? And we're going to talk about removing limitations. And this is a term I love to use. Dr. Goldratt, who actually created the theory of constraints, has a really interesting way of thinking about value or innovation. And it's to remove a significant limitation in a way that was not possible before, and in a way your competition can't easily replicate. We could spend a day just on that phrase. But removing limitations. People want to do something. There's something they want to access or do, and they can't, right? So think of our phones. We now can carry tons of music on our phone. You are all too young for this. But back, when I was growing up, you had like a record player. You couldn't carry it with you. Steve Jobs removed the limitation in Spotify of the ability. We wanted to carry a lot of music around us. We couldn't. Now we can, all right? So what's the difference with Tatas and the blind? So this is what's interesting. So this guy sets up the school for the blind. They're doing all this embossed stuff, trying hard, bringing innovative ideas to the table. And this kid named Louis Braille, Braille's named after him. He was one of the first kids to go there, fully blind. He was a musician and was really frustrated with what was happening at the school. And by the way, frustration can be a good thing. It can often lead us to where we need to spend some time and attention. I'll talk about that in a bit. But he saw all this stuff going on, and there's some people helped translate, and he had friends that he would write and dictate a journal to. And so you can still access some of his journals. And he had some passages that were very heartbreaking, actually. But all he wanted was to read and write in real time. That's what he wanted. That was the limitation to remove. Not to hurry and emboss something 3 years down the road and bring a book and it takes them a year to emboss it. And even with the embossing, you couldn't write as a blind person, right? So there's no ability to read and write in real time. That was the limitation to remove. And why is that so important? Because he, the blind person, that was his problem to solve. And the sighted folks were great, well-intended, right? There's nothing wasted. Riley and I talk about that. Nothing's wasted. They learn from it. But they are trying to impose their solution on the problem rather than starting with the problem, and the problem is always attached to a person, right? Who is the person? So the blind person here, that's the problem to solve for. How do I read and write in real time? That is a conundrum. But that's the problem that is worth spending time and energy on. What's the limitation? Now, not all of you have to change the world and create a whole new way of reading and writing for blind people across the globe. But whatever space you're in, who are you solving for? It's really important. The Tata example is really interesting. So after Nano, that failed, but actually a little before that, they created a truck. It's called the ACE truck. It's still doing very, very well. And it's interesting that they failed so much on the Nano. The problem why Nano failed is also nobody wanted to be seen. It's a caste system, and to be viewed as the poorest person, right? When you bought a car that was the most affordable car, it was a signal to everybody else around you that you were on the lower end of the caste system. So they didn't start with the customer in mind, and they also didn't understand that most of the customers that they were trying to market to before using the nano car, they were using these scooters. And how you bought a scooter was a very different distribution channel than how you bought a car in rural parts of India, maintenance. It was a whole different strategy because they didn't figure out what the customer really needed, how to buy the car, where to buy the car, how to maintain the stigma associated with the car. It was a bust. It didn't go well. But on the other hand, they used ACE. ACE was back in the day when they created it, a lot of the small businesses and commercial businesses, they would use three-wheel like scooters to get in and out of Indian roads and to move product to stores, etc. And they realized that during inclement weather, that wasn't great. It wasn't always safe, and they couldn't carry enough load. It was a three-wheel car, like basically a scooter thing. So they started with the customer. Who was it? Their small business owner who had to transport product in high-dense areas who didn't have, with tight margins. So how could they solve for that? How could they create a vehicle that was fuel efficient, super affordable, safe, could carry more load, and get in and out of very tiny streets? When they started from the customer and understand the limitation they had to remove for that customer, they built a very viable product. They had to develop a new engine. I don't drive, and it's so funny. I use driving examples all the time. I'm like, I don't even know where the gas is versus the brake. But they had to come up with a 2-cylinder engine versus a traditional 4-cylinder, or these scooters was one. They had to come up with a whole bunch of new technology that was very innovative to allow them to build a small little truck that could handle bad weather, could carry a bigger load, and was actually required very little maintenance because these are folks didn't have a lot of money. If they were rural parts of India, getting to maintenance was hard. So they actually shifted some of the engineering itself. And you'll hear us talk in theory of constraints a lot about this term called subordinate, meaning one thing is less important than the other thing. They subordinated the engineering to the needs of the customer. What they did not do is come with their ideas and impose it on the customer. This is so important because in government especially, government loves new evidence-based models, or new vendors will sell these incredibly expensive data analytic systems, or new case management systems. I was just in a state, they're going to stand up a $30 million IT system in child welfare. High stakes individuals who are at risk, they're going to throw $30 million into the toilet. I can guarantee it. Because it's not starting with what does the customer need. We often become very internally focused. How do we want our screen to look? What are our case notes? What's the data we want to collect? And they build massive systems around things that are important to them, but aren't the primary need for the primary customer. So think about as I'm going blind. As Rich said, I had the opportunity to work in DC. We were back there. That's where Riley was born, actually. We were in Maryland at the time. I'm a reformed federal bureaucrat, so I can apologize for any damage I did, a reformed federal bureaucrat. And I could look at some of the stuff they were doing during the time I was going blind, and they were working on some new legislation and regulations. And at the time, the government was really focused on one of what I call the seductive seven. These are really administrative, inward initiatives people look at. They were looking at reorganizing government. to create a one-stop. So there's a Department of Education, Department of Labor, they have different programs, and they were going to make them into one piece of legislation, rebrand them with a new name, and have them all coordinate and work together and reorganize who reported to whom. Now, that sounds great, right? People get all excited about mergers and acquisitions and reorganizations, and as you guys get older into the workplace, you'll see this brain damage happening everywhere. It's brain, from my perspective. I'm opinionated, I told you. You throw it out the window if you don't like it. But do you think as I'm going blind, my primary problem to solve was that the federal government wasn't reorganized? That's nuts. But the amount of time and energy organizations spend on things that aren't related to the primary customer's primary need. They will stand up initiatives and strategic plans and new data systems and more technology, all of this stuff. But the primary customer's primary need, they are not grounded in that. It is not a filter. I will look to organizations and look at all of the initiatives they have going on. I'll say, first of all, do you even know what's going on? Most of the times they don't. Okay, bring it all together. Let me see what you're working on. Most of it will be about compliance, inward-focused stuff, what I need, my new screen, I need to order laptops quicker, all that good stuff. Secondary needs, meaning very often organizations will drift to nice-to-haves. I'm going to update my website, even though it still takes me 6 months to get a permit issued to a business. We call those secondary needs. They're much easier to solve for. The primary customer's primary need, for example, in child welfare, I have a kid who is potentially at risk for abuse and neglect. Everything in this system has got to make sure that thing is handled quickly and well. 5% of the time and energy of the organization is usually focused on that in government. The rest is focused on, and we brought you some books. It's first edition. We made some changes. We wrote this first book really quickly, but it will lay out the Seductive 7. One of them is more, just layer on a new case management system for $30 million and hope the problems will be solved. It's really hard to subordinate and organize and tease out what the primary customer's primary need is. How are they going to buy the product? Where's the ideal purchasing situation? What kind of friction do they need to overcome in order to purchase the product? Does it remove a limitation, or is it just a nice new feature and benefit? So these are like simple concepts I teach in organizations, and I work with folks, but it is fundamental, and I would say, Randy works with me on this. Wouldn't you say 90% of the time they're not focused on it? Vague initiatives, things that sound good, but the core issue isn't getting resolved. So let me give you another example. In a state where they spent millions of dollars with a highfalutin consulting company to do an economic development report, pages and pages of blah, blah data that anyone can spew out. ChatGPT could do it today, right? Just lots of data, because somehow there's this idea, the more data I have, the more insight I have. Not true. Data are just words and numbers. We have a thinking problem, not a data problem in this country. So they have all this data about one of the top industries in that state, which is agriculture. Agriculture is bread and butter to this state. It impacts almost every element of their economy. But guess what they didn't start with? A lot of stuff about this state, the revenue the state could get, how the R&D for the universities could grow. But who's the primary customer in agriculture? You'll see this a lot in economic development in states and in cities. It's all about the revenue I'm going to get. We in government don't create revenue. We suck it out of other people, right? Who's the primary? It's the producer, the person on the farm who's working day in and day out to grow crops, sell crops, take care of cattle, etc. What's their problem? Guess what was nowhere in that report? Their problem. Now, their problem gets a little complex. They're in what's called a commodities market, a lot of pressure to keep prices down so they don't get a lot of margin, and they can't get out of these vicious cycles. They lose money all the time. It's a big problem to solve for. But the whole system needs to anchor and focus how to remove that limitation. How does a producer get more value for their crops? That is a harder problem to solve for. You have to look at distribution, you have to look at branding, you have to deal with processing plants. It's a much harder problem to solve for. It is easy to create cute little strategic plans. It's easy to create reports that sound good. Usually solving the customer's problem is really hard. And I've heard little bits and pieces from Riley, some of your guys' cool projects going on, and they actually sound amazing. Really amazing, because I feel like you guys at this level are so tight to the customer. You probably see the customer quicker and easier than we do when we get into management or higher levels. We can get a little detached. You guys have that advantage right now. I mean, Kate and Kristen, if I may just talk about you guys for a second, I know about your product, and I'm going to be a tester on it. They're removing a real limitation. I won't give it away, but I've seen their product. I think they're removing a problem for people who like to drink coffee at night. It's amazing what they're doing. So you've got to start solving real problems for real people, not vague problems for organizations. That is the trick in the work I do, at least. So let me go to another example. So this, Riley and I talk about this as well all the time. One of the values at our company, and Rich was so great in making sure I have values verbalized in my company, my own management philosophy that we talk about. And one of those values is the obstacle is the way. And sometimes, even when we're grounded in that primary customer's primary problem, we still can feel like, well, how am I going to solve this? Right? There could be a lot of challenges to overcome. It seems impossible. There's a lot of stuff there that may block us from moving forward or making progress, or we give up. When we went to San Diego a few years ago, we stayed at Airbnb for vacation, and I love to go for walks. Walking's my thing. And when I'm in new areas, I have to be a little thoughtful about it, or I'll get lost. I do have Find My Friends on my phone where I can call Randy and go, find me, I'm lost. But I usually will start and go one block, and then go out farther, and then go farther, and finally till I can map the system a little bit. So I was out walking, and I was doing my first walk around the neighborhood. So I went out this way, and I was coming back, and a car had parked right on the sidewalk. I hope you guys don't do that, just FYI. But parked right on the sidewalk. So I found the car. And at first I was kind of ticked about it. I was like, who does this, right? Like I kind of jammed myself up a little bit. But then I realized once I walked past the car, that was like my street where our Airbnb was, and then there was our Airbnb. So this thing at first I was kind of ticked about, it wasn't an obstacle anymore, it became a landmark. Now I knew I could walk and not have to count blocks in new areas. I'll kind of count blocks so I can keep track of where I'm at. I could walk as far as I wanted, turn, come back, hit the car, and then turn. It was like became a landmark. The obstacle was now a landmark. And so these things that we think are really hard are actually the opportunity. And a lot of times I think in entrepreneurship and business or in life, a lot of people will stand down as soon as they have a problem. One thing I really admire about Riley and Connor and his team, that they just keep pushing through challenges. The obstacles are inevitable. Last week I was with a large organization, and they have a Medicaid program. Medicaid is health insurance for low-income individuals. It is absolutely driving costs up in state budgets. And with all the change and all the stuff that they've done in the healthcare system, it's not making an impact. And this is for one part of this Medicaid is for this group of people who are, really vulnerable group of people. And it's a lot of money. It's that program, just that for that group is over $1 billion. And we started to talk about some solutions, and out of the gate, people started to say why it's not possible. And that's not a bad thing, right? So at first, some of the other people were getting frustrated because some people were saying all the reasons why the thing couldn't be done. I actually love pulling those out of people because sometimes they have some intuition. There's some what we call yes buts that are happening that we need to actually expose, because those problems are the way things we got to figure out how to solve for, right? If somebody's saying we can't actually get the services within a week and it takes 45 days, it's impossible to do it in a week versus 45 days, which is not impossible. These are operational problems. That's what we've got to solve for. So we often pull out, give me your reasons, give me your yes buts, tell me why this is hard. And that gives me my marching orders. The thing of we can't do services within a week, it takes 45 days, that turns into an action step for me. I now need to figure out a solution to get services to people within a week. Is that impossible, do you think? No, it's not. Most of our organizations are totally made up. Totally made up. I'm sorry to say, higher ed, made up, right? People had an idea, they had a policy, they had a procedure, they put something in place and then started to measure it and built infrastructure and buildings around it. And we act like that's real. It's not. I mean, there's, science, Newtonian physics, or gravitational pull, Newtonian physics, those things, like, we can't get out, those are real. But so many of our organizations, your own ideas, your own distribution channels, they're made up. And so when we start to face these obstacles, what we can do is just give them life by turning them into, I can't get services in 7 days, to an action step. Design a solution to get services to people in 7 days. Because, by the way, primary customers' primary need in this system is to get people services, otherwise they're going to be institutionalized. And if they can't do that in 7 days and it's 45 days, shut them down. Don't take the taxpayer dollar if you can't make it valuable for people. So the obstacle is the way, right? We start with the primary customer. We understand within the context there what are the challenges. Let's go back to Louis Braille. What are the challenges for Louis Braille? He set this primary customer primary need, which should be the goal of the organization, to allow blind people to read and write Braille in real time. That is a freaking problem to solve. What was so interesting is one night he had a friend reading him the newspaper, and the newspaper was talking about the French military. And the French military designed something pretty innovative. If they were battling at night and sending messages to each other, they didn't want to turn on a lantern at nighttime because to read the message, because it would expose to their enemy their location. So they created tactile signs, like a little circle, we're surrounded, or an arrow or something. And that was the beginning of Louis Braille thinking about how he could solve this. He didn't come to the problem with the presupposed solution, right? Like the sighted people had done. I'm going to take the alphabet and emboss the alphabet. The limitation, the constraints of the solution had to allow for a blind person to read and write Braille in real time, which means it had to be compact. You could take it with you. And that was the beginning of creating Braille. 6 dots. Combinations of 6 dots can make words, letters, music, math. Just the combination of 6 dots. And it's so sad he died never understanding the impact he had. It was actually Napoleon at one of these big world fairs where Braille was exposed to one of Louis Braille's music students who'd used Braille to sing, and it went viral across the world and started to change the life of blind people. But because he had to figure out the constraint or the obstacle to do it in real time, not presuppose a solution, but be open to what can I bring to the table that's different. And that little spark of how do I do tactile signs was the beginning of a whole new way of thinking. That is innovation. Innovation is when you bring a new solution to a very real problem, not just something new. When you really remove a limitation for people. Now, the limitation can be small or big or life-changing, but the point is you're actually solving a problem. And I feel like this innovation culture we get into, we've lost, at least in government, lost the way a little bit on just the newest innovative thing. I always say the basics are the breakthrough. Get the customer's primary need done really well. Whatever product you're looking at or whatever you're thinking about or whatever you're interested in, be super good. Every aspect of it, distribution, marketing, everything should just be at a standard that is so high, all about getting that primary customer what they need. All right, so 2 more points on this. Once we understand that we have a primary customer's need, we're going to hit obstacles. We're not going to let those block them because the obstacle is the opportunity. That's where the innovation can happen. But even then, it can feel pretty overwhelming. If you're starting a business or even school, sometimes I look at the amount of homework all you guys have, it can feel a bit overwhelming. And I've had to teach myself this own concept called chunk it. Riley knows about this, but I have to really use it. So when I'm traveling solo, let's say last week of all places, I was in North Dakota. Freezing cold. Why North Dakota? I don't know. That's where I was at, working for the group up there. So to get to North Dakota, I have to go through Minneapolis. I hate that airport. I understand the Salt Lake Airport. I understand Reagan. I understand even Atlanta Airport. I do not. Anyone been to the Minneapolis Airport? You have? Does it make any sense to you? It makes no sense to me. I cannot get my mental head around it. So when I'm heading out to do a trip, if I had to think from beginning to end how every little step was going to work, I would never leave my house. It's interesting, there's a philosophy in the blind world. One's called route method and one's called discovery method. And I was fortunately trained under the discovery method. The route method is you memorize a route, 50 steps, take a left, 20 steps, and you can get to the bus stop or whatever. The discovery method is like go forth and figure out the world, And so if I had to have everything planned out, because I don't know always how I'm going to get through an airport. I don't always know if the stupid thermostat in the hotel room is going to be touchscreen or manual. That's always the big challenge in the hotel. Get my thermostat fixed. I don't know how to do it all. And when I get into organizations, they're often into this strategic planning, listing all the details, as if we can know the future. There's a phrase from Dr. Goldratt I love. He says, we cannot impose certainty on uncertainty. There's a lot of things we just can't know. Have any of you guys heard of the company called Course Hero? Started with a college student. He was just trying to share notes and information on lectures to help students, learn and be more successful in their classes. And he did really well with that. And from there, he kind of grew it and took it to other colleges. And from there, he grew it and started to include tutoring services. And from there, he started to do online classes, and it got bigger and bigger. The company today is now about $1 billion, worth about $1 billion. He didn't start knowing how everything was going to work out, right? Sometimes we have to just do the best we can with what we know is right in front of us. My career has been really interesting. I've been very blessed. I had no idea I would be doing this. Zero idea. I had certain opportunities. I did the best I could with what I knew and what was in front of me. And I have found that over time when we do that, the next thing opens up. You're going to probably graduate college or do your classes or your major. What are you going to do? How's your business going to work? All the questions about life, and guess what? You can't know them and you don't need to know them. We can just focus on chunks of it. What do I know to do now? I know my destination, right? I'm not just willy-nilly out there thinking, am I going to Alaska or China? Like, I know where I'm going, but I don't always know how to get there. And I often have found taking things in chunks and getting really good at that will expose and reveal what the next thing is. More strategic planning actually is one of my seductive 7. I'll see organizations every year. They have the off-site retreat to do the strategic planning, and a lot of words go on a piece of paper with 50 pages nobody reads. It goes on a website, and then nothing changes. So it's okay not to know how to do everything. And I think that's the beauty of entrepreneurship, is this ability to live in things that are a little uncomfortable. And that will get to my last 2 points. Doing the kind of work you're all interested in, or just life in general, there's a level of discomfort we have to be okay with. I don't think life is just meant to be easy. I think life is often a series of problem solving. This idea that we're going to get to this perfect state where everything is exactly how we want it to be, I don't think that's how life works. And when I went blind, it really had a big moment. I was really embarrassed and ashamed to use a cane. And I was right in this transition of needing a cane, but not fully needing a cane, and I didn't want people to stare at me, and all that pressure, like how do I look, and what do people think, all that stuff, that chatter in our head that is not very helpful to us. I actually one day fell in a manhole. It was a big wake-up call, and I knew I needed some help. I needed to start living my life in a way that would let me show up the best way I needed to show up, not based off how everybody else thought I should show up. And I had the blessing to go to a 5-month residential training program for the blind. Riley's heard this story a million times, but I use this concept every day. And we had to learn everything. We had to use power tools to build furniture. We had to barbecue and learn assisted technology and all this stuff. But the thing that we had to do to graduate that scared me the most is we had to wear sleep shades. So if we had any peripheral vision or anything like that, they were there to, you'd think they were sending us there to learn Braille and, the skills of blindness, and that was true. They were really there to change our mindset That was their trickery that they didn't quite explain until you're halfway through the program and I started to catch on what was going on. They wanted us to force ourselves to challenge the assumptions we had about blindness. So we'd wear these sleep shades all day, every day. And one of the things to graduate is they would drop us off in a random location. We were at Baltimore City at the time. A random location in the city that we'd be in a van. They'd have music going so we wouldn't know where we are. Drop us off and we'd have to find our way back to the training center on our own. We could have a Braille compass and we could ask one question along the way of a pedestrian. And that terrified me, of all the things we had to do. I'll use table saws all day. That scared me more. And I would practice every day for a few hours with my instructor on cane travel. Because it takes time, right, to really rethink how we do life. And we were at a park one day across from the training center, and I could not get out of this park for the life of me. I would walk, I would hit like a bench, or I'd walk and I'd hit grass, or I'd walk and I'd, find myself right where I was. I knew where I was. I could hear the freeway, so I knew where I was north, south, east, west, but I couldn't get out of the park. And I remember just standing still. I just stopped, said, I'm not doing this. Like, this cannot be how my life is, and I was really frustrated. And, you're all not blind, but we all have our things inside of us, our insecurities, our doubts, or life feels hard, or we wonder if we can do it, or if we're capable, or how. Or we get jaded or cynical or all the stuff that can happen where we just kind of feel a little stuck. And my instructor was awesome. He always gave me enough rope to hang myself. He had very high expectations. He was not about, they talked a lot about equal rights requires equal responsibility. We in the blind need to give back as much as we need help, and just high expectations and not to be victims in our situation. So he let me just struggle, and he finally came out and he says, wow, she's stubborn, she's not moving. And he came up and he said something to me that I use all the time, like last week when I traveled to North Dakota. He said, you've got to learn to walk through your uncertainty. You have to learn to walk through your fear and your confusion. He said, nothing new will come by just standing still. And I have used that even when I walked and I hit the bench. That was still information. Again, Riley and I talk about nothing is wasted. That was still good feedback. I now knew where a bench was. I had to start to learn to feel uncomfortable and be comfortable with that. And when you're going into new things like new jobs or new careers or a new business or whatever, new social situations, there's always a little discomfort there, right? That is just part of life. And I've had to learn to just live with that. It's not that I sometimes don't have trepidation. When I have to go through Austin Airport, I hate TSA at Austin. I don't know what's going on there. They're never organized. Hate it. How am I going to find my bags on the other side? I don't like that. But I know I can do it. And the discomfort and the insecurity or the wonders if I can are not a reason not to keep moving forward. They're just part of life. And that's so important in this world of entrepreneurship because you're going to test products or ideas. Maybe they'll fail. Nothing's wasted. You got good feedback. You learned something. There is nothing wasted. And it's just if you're going to let those fears rule you or are you going to let them be part of your journey? So last point. We can have the primary customer, primary need. We can totally know that the obstacles are the opportunity. How do we focus? How do we break those barriers? We can really get into being comfortable with our uncertainty, and we can chunk it, not have to know everything out of the gate. And the final thing I would leave with is Dr. Schroeder, who is one of my orientation instructors back in that training program, brilliant man. He actually worked for the Clinton administration over time and PhD. He's a very, very smart man and had very high expectations of blind people. Really, quit complaining, suck it up, figure it out kind of guy. And it was great. Because sometimes if you're blind, people want to take care of you and all this stuff. So he had a great attitude. And he had, before he was teaching at the center, he was an itinerant teacher, meaning he would go to schools and help kids in mainstream schools who were blind be successful and make sure they had everything they needed to be taught in a mainstream school. So he one day went to meet with a little boy named Tony, and Tony was 7, and Tony wanted to play tag. And totally blind, wanted to play tag. And you know how kids are? They're not like all messed up yet. Like, can I do it? Can't I do it? He just assumed that he could play tag. So he say, Dr. Schroeder, yeah, so how do you play tag? And Dr. Schroeder's like, let me think about that. Tony, I'll get back to you. So he went home that night to think about it. Like, how is this little kid going to play tag as a blind person? He couldn't figure it out. And he was really kind of sad because he believed the next day he was going to go back and have to tell Tony, you're going to have to sit this one out. I don't know how you can play tag as a blind person. But fortunately, before he could say that, Tony came up to him, and he was so excited he had figured it out. Tony had figured out he could give his friends plastic jars with rocks in them, and as long as the friends didn't cheat and stayed in a designed area, and he could hear them move, right? They could shake the jar, he could hear them, and he could play tag. Riley, do you remember when we tried that with our phones?
Yeah, I think we got some pretty head-on collisions.
Well, I know. So what we learned is you have to have somebody up above saying, drop! So like if you're going to have a collision, I ski and I use a ski guide, and if I'm about to fall off a cliff, they have to say drop. We have a safe word. We realized we needed a safe word when we tried it out. But it works if you have a safe word. And so Tony figured out how to play tag. So why do I share that with you? At the end of the day, I think this journey so many of you are on in your business, Tony didn't wonder if it was possible. He didn't start with the assumption if this is possible. He started with the assumption it is possible. The question is how. And that is such a mind shift issue. When I go to organizations, they're always like, if we can do this, if we can't, that's like they're spending all of their energy around if this is possible. It's not the right question to start with. There's a time and place, maybe you iterate and you get to a point where you've got to walk away. But imagine the world if we assumed it's how. How do we do it? I have to be a creative blind person, right? How do I keep my clothes organized? How do I do all this stuff? You have to be creative. And that's what entrepreneurship is. It's just one set of creative problem solving. That's why I think the world and the business world you guys are in, it's just so exciting because you get to be artists. You get to create and be engineers of art and ideas through this idea of how can I do this? And I've looked at Riley's work, they'll hit challenges and then it's like, okay, how are we going to do it now? How are we going to figure it out? When you go to a government and you say to them, how can we reduce taxes significantly while improving services? How many of you then think that's possible? Hey, let's take a $1 billion cut to your budget and improve services. Do you think most people think that's possible? No. Out of the gate, they shut the idea down. The question is how, because I know it is, because I've seen it happen time and time again. It is possible. I look at SUU. When I was in the governor's office, we were looking at universities across the state, and SUU was awesome and still is. How do you actually have freshman retention? We were getting so many budget requests up there about tuition increases, and SUU were like, you know what? We're just going to hold the line. We're not going to increase tuition on students. Not common in the other universities. People jump to more money like that fast. So just the mindset itself is so key. I don't care if you own your own business or you work for somebody else. You're always going to have problems to solve, and it's the mindset of not if, but how. So to summarize, I personally think there's a lot of ineffective innovation out there, and it's because we don't really understand the primary customer's primary problem. What's the limitation we need to remove for them? When we understand that, we're going to set up a new set of problems we have to solve for. Those are the problems now we have to solve for. It's about you always have problems. The questions are which ones? What's your problem set? And when you do that, you're going to come up with a lot of obstacles. And the obstacles are the opportunity. That's where the breakthrough happens. Nobody else has been able to penetrate it or push through with the new business model or how well you operate or the product design itself, whatever it is. You'll have a new set of problems to solve for. Those are the opportunity. They're not the barrier. And then from there, we can really understand, how do we chunk it? I don't have to know it all right now. I can do the next thing I know, the next right thing, do the very best with what you have. And I can't say for everyone, my experience is the path unfolds. And then, we finally can get into being uncomfortable with our discomfort, just part of life. There's no way to get around it. The more you can make peace, with the fact that life won't always be perfect, the more happy you'll be, actually. That's the paradox. And then finally, if not how. And those are things that I just know every day in my business and my personal life have just made such a difference for me. And I hope they do for you as well. And with that, I will wrap up. Yes, sir. What's your name?
You've uncovered so many awesome things right in this little speech that you've given in such a short burst. I want to know, while you were going through your conversion of normal life versus adapting to the next life you're going into, how much downtime did you have and how would it take you to get on board with what you were going through?
Oh, with the blindness?
Yeah, I know.
Plus, I love your accent, so I will answer your question.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
No, I will call that. I talked the dark years. There were a few dark years that were hard. And it was really that middle place where I wasn't really sighted, but I didn't identify myself as blind. You know, like I was in this middle place. I didn't know where I was. And, you know, when I fell in that manhole, and that's why I actually think the things that are hardest, usually, when I look back, were the best things that happened to me. Nothing is wasted. Your hard things are not bad things. They're just hard. It took me a few years. I taught myself Braille when I was 26. We had our first child, and I couldn't read. So I remember it took me a year, but I taught myself, and I read Hop on Pop. That was my first book. And then my second book I read, The Hobbit. We are Lord of the Rings fans in our household. Hobbit had to be the first book. It took me a year to get through. So that's why I say chunk it. Like, I had to teach myself Braille like one letter at a time a day. That was my commitment. One day, one letter. A, and then I would just practice A. It feels like salt on a piece of paper. That's why I'm like, this is nuts. How are you gonna? I'm not ever gonna read Braille. So I had to even chunk Braille, B, and then I had a chunk. Riley's exposed me to ChatGPT. Quite frankly, as a blind person, my technology is always clunky. It just cuts through so much of the crap I have to use. I'm always learning and tweaking, and playing around with stuff, you know, because the world isn't designed for me. So I'm always trying to problem solve through it. But it took some years to get peace with it. To have peace with it. I still have challenges, but to have peace with it, it took a few years.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Great question. Why don't, if you want to stay and ask questions, go ahead. If you want to come up and grab a book, Riley and I both have books for everyone.
Thanks, you guys. It was fun spending time with you.